Lesson 4, Unit 1, Stakeholder Matrix. Stakeholder is a general term to describe individuals, groups, or organizations that have an interest in the project and can mobilize resources to affect its outcome in some way. A formal definition from the PMI is individuals and organizations who are actively involved in the project or whose interests may be positively or negatively affected as a result of project execution or successful project completion. Stakeholders may include individuals, community leaders, groups, and other public and private organizations who will be impacted by the project or who could influence the outcome. Stakeholder analysis are the different techniques or tools used to identify and understand the needs and expectations of the stakeholders inside and outside the project environment. It is used to identify all stakeholders who have a vested interest in the issues with which the project is concerned. A stakeholder analysis aims to develop a strategic view of the people and institutional landscape and the relationships within the different stakeholders and the issues they care about most. The larger the project, the larger is the number of stakeholders that will be involved. In a development project, stakeholder analysis can help you identify the levels of interest and influence of all stakeholders, the groups of stakeholders that should be encouraged to participate, the concerns and needs of the stakeholders, to build relationships and sustain the support from key stakeholders, and reduce the potential impact of negative stakeholders. Stakeholder analysis is a process that should be done during the life of the project. The first analysis is done during the analysis and design of the project to understand the stakeholder landscape. During the planning of the project, to develop the relationship strategies, and during implementation, to support and encourage the support from the stakeholders, and especially during the monitoring and evaluation to listen and receive input to improve the project. A stakeholder register is a simple tool that facilitates the identification and analysis of all stakeholders. It helps capture information from each stakeholder and their level of interest and influence in the project. With this information, the project manager can prioritize the efforts to build relationships with key stakeholders. The register should be reviewed on a regular basis to add new stakeholders or stakeholders that are changing their levels of influence and interest. There are 3 simple steps to complete a stakeholder register. The first step is to identify all the project stakeholders. Then, to categorize them based on their level of interest and influence in the project, and then select an engagement strategy to build their support to the project. The identification of stakeholders is a list of all the people or institutions that meet the definition of a stakeholder. These can include donors, partners, beneficiaries, government officials, support units from the organization, and others. In the first draft, the list may not be comprehensive, but will help identify the most important stakeholders. As the project team learns more about the project environment, more stakeholders will be identified and added to the register. The next step is to classify the stakeholders based on their levels of interest and influence in the project. The levels can be organized as low and high. Influence is the relative power a stakeholder has over the project. A stakeholder with a high level of influence could control key decisions or control over resources the project needs. Influence usually comes from the stakeholder's hierarchical, economical, social, or political position, and sometimes through the personal connections to other stakeholders with high influence. Another indicator can be expert knowledge or leadership skills. Interest is the level of support the stakeholder is willing to commit to the project. The types of interest or support can include access to resources such as material, people, or financial, participation in activities, and support by collaborating to help the project achieve its goals. Once information from each stakeholder is completed, the next step is to map each stakeholder in the influence interest grid. This is a chart that plots two levels of interest and influence. Making an interest versus influence matrix helps map out the stakeholders and their relationship with the project. It generates insights into the interest and influence of each stakeholder. With this information, it becomes possible to develop a specific approach and strategy to identify stakeholders. The grid shows 4 categories: keep satisfied, manage closely, monitor, and keep informed. Stakeholders with high influence and high interest are major stakeholders. They are heavily invested in the project. They must be actively managed. Stakeholders with high influence but low interest must be kept satisfied. They can derail the project over seemingly minor issues. Stakeholders with low influence but high interest must be kept informed. Stakeholders with low influence and low interest must be monitored in case they become more influential with the potential to affect the project in the future. The project manager can also use a stakeholder engagement strategy matrix. This matrix defines the project management team's stakeholder management activities during the implementation of the project. It is developed during project planning and updated as new information about the stakeholder buy-in is obtained. Most, if not all, the stakeholders fall into one of the following 5 categories based on the level of engagement with the project. Unaware, they are not aware of the project and its potential impact on them. Resistant, they are aware of the project but not in support of it. Neutral, they are aware of the project but have no opinion regarding their support for it. Supportive, they are supportive of the project and wish to succeed it. Leading, they are actively engaged in project success and willing to lend assistance to help it succeed. The project manager can identify those key stakeholders that need to be more involved in supporting the project. This tool facilitates the tracking of the stakeholder engagement. For example, if a stakeholder is currently in the unaware category but needs to move into the supporting category, this process can be actively tracked until the C and the D are in the same column.